Live, which I believe we are. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, and today we're going to be talking about customer journey mapping and analytics, rather, customer journey analytics, I should say. There is a massive gap right now in the field of conversational automation and customer experience automation in general. A huge gap when it comes to analytics, in my opinion. Every single thing we work on, you can't work on any conversational AI initiative without analytics, both interaction analytics, as in what is this conversation successful? Is it achieving the goals that the business and customer needs? But there's two other layers that I don't think many are looking at. There is the customer journey layer, which is where are people coming from? When they're in that conversation, are you actually resolving their issue? Are they calling back 4 days later? Are they switching channels and trying to do something else on another channel? Is this the first time they're talking to you in a period of time, or have they spoke to you every week for the last 3 weeks? There's a whole load of stuff that goes into understanding whether your efforts of improving customer experience are actually having an impact in you. So you've got to understand the customer journey. And then the level above that is the business. Is this thing actually contributing to the business? Is it generating revenue? Is it streamlining processes? Is it saving money? Whatever your goals are, you need to be able to measure it, quantify it, and tie it back to the conversations that you're having. These are the areas where I think there's huge gaps in many organizations' understanding and also their active implementations. People are beginning to get better at understanding the interaction level, understanding your NLU confidence scores, understanding turn-based analytics, looking at that sort of fallback report and all this sort of stuff. People are starting to get there. But the other two layers of journey and business analytics couldn't be further away. And so an expert in customer journey analytics is Tim Friebel from Genesys. He's currently the global experience transformation lead. He's got a wealth of experience in this kind of stuff, and he's going to join us today to walk us through some of the key considerations, some of the benefits, and also maybe some of the challenges that you might have in trying to implement all of this stuff. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tim Friebel to VUX World. Tim, welcome.
Thanks, Kane. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining me. I know it took us a little while to set this conversation up, so I appreciate your patience and excited to get into it today. So whereabouts are you in the world?
So I'm in St. Louis, Missouri.
St. Louis, Missouri.
Right in the middle of the United States. Most people, or some people, especially in Europe, are like, "What? Where's that?" Right? So yeah, middle of the United States.
Nice. That sounds good. And so, how long have you been at Genesys for?
So I've been with Genesys about 5 years, a number of different roles. Started as a business consultant, really focused on artificial intelligence for the contact center, focused on conversational AI for a couple of years. And then we actually acquired a customer journey analytics software called Personalised about a year and a half ago. And coincidentally, prior to Genesys, I worked in the customer journey analytics space for a little over a decade with a company that was kind of at the forefront of that. Frankly, we were too early to the market. The company was called ClickFox. It's not really around anymore. But obviously, whenever we made that acquisition, it made sense for me to kind of slide over and help that team as well. So now really focusing on helping customers understand where they start, from their AI strategy, but also, how do we apply customer journey analytics to, understand business impacts of these things that we're implementing.
Nice. So when you first began then the whole sort of process with what did you call it, ClickFox, what was it? What was the situation then? What were the sort of, like, I suppose, best practices? Quite a while ago now, looking at your LinkedIn profile, like what were some of, like, the best in class sort of, like, technologies, I suppose, at the time, and what did journey analytics look like then as compared to what you have now with Personalised?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'd say the problem statement is still the same. We started with a perspective of, we actually had a product called customer experience analytics, right? And then through partnering with some of the big management consulting firms out there, the journey term started to take flight. So, we latched onto that, and so you had, and like I said, the problem statement is still the same. You still had analytics tools out there that were focused on maybe one piece of the journey. It was like, for example, Omniture, who was ultimately purchased by Adobe, was focused on the web and mobile customer journey piece of it. Usually focused on the sales funnel. And then, you'd also have people that were kind of doing reporting in the contact center. You'd have the voice of the customer side of that, where people are looking at, CSAT, NPS, that type of thing. And, really weren't connecting those things together. Like fundamentally, it's hard to do, right? Because you have data coming from many different data sources that you're trying to connect together. So, the problem statement was largely the same, is that how do we really see what customers are doing across all these channels and across time? So instead of it being, just looking at one piece of the journey that's occurring within a couple of minutes, you're looking at, potentially you're looking back 6 weeks or even 6 months, like what's this customer experience as they're onboarding, things like that. So, the problem statement is largely the same. The approach that Pointillist took to it is very similar. Obviously technology has evolved a lot to make the data collection piece easier, running in the cloud, all those kinds of things. So sort of the how, changed and evolved, but ultimately the business problem statement was still the same.
That makes sense, yeah. And I suppose even today, perhaps the challenge is still kind of there, isn't it? I mean, if you look at something like Google Analytics, for example, or you mentioned Adobe Analytics there, like those analytics tools today are pretty good at focusing on one channel,
Yep.
web analytics, mobile analytics, and they can map a journey from the perspective of, okay, a customer comes from search engine, they then go on this page, that page, this page, click this button, scroll to this depth, fill in this form, and then that's it, And so I suppose like especially when it comes to like conversational AI, tying, a conversation that might happen in an IVR system over here, or a chat bot on your website here, or a WhatsApp conversation over there. And those interactions are not just the only interactions that customers have. Maybe they start on your website, then call your contact center. Maybe they call your contact center and then try WhatsApp later. So in this sort of like omni-channel world, I suppose, would you agree with that actually it gets more complex to actually track the customer journey in its entirety?
Yeah, 100%. And because all the systems that you mentioned, they kind of have all their own unique identifier for the interaction. So if you think about how would we identify the connectivity between these things, right? The contact center is going to have like a call ID, or whatever the term is that you want to use within contact center platform. For the interaction itself, you're going to have the same thing with maybe a cookie ID on the website, as well as an interaction ID, et cetera. When customers authenticate, you get additional pieces of information, right? You might get their account number, their phone number, their email address, whatever. So there's all these pieces that are there, but sort of the secret sauce is being able to tie those things together across channels, and have a cohesive view of what the customer is doing across the channels. Yeah, absolutely. It's we have some customers that we actually ingest like greater than 50 different data sources.
Wow.
So you're thinking about connecting together, billing data, potentially, I mentioned kind of voice of the customer, CSAT data, et cetera. Even ATM declines, things like that. So you're really looking at a really granular level of the events that are occurring across all these systems. And then putting the business lens on it is, what's this customer in the process of doing or trying to do? Are they trying to pay a bill? Are they new? Are they onboarding? They're trying to add a product. And those things, again, can take, over time, those things can take maybe a couple of weeks, depending on what type of journeys you're talking about, right? So it's not only the data connectivity piece, but it's also looking at it from the lens of the business to say, customers typically have, our customers, I mean, not the end customer, but typically have, 10 or 15 core journeys. Like, what are the core things you can do with a brand? Like I mentioned, paying bill, onboarding, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a different mindset of thinking about how do we actually run our business by that concept. Like, how good is our onboarding journey, understanding that, a customer might sign up for a new product online. Maybe they need to go and create an online profile. Then they've called the contact center, et cetera, over the course of those 6 weeks, right? So it's really kind of a different perspective to think about how are we looking at this customer experience.
Yeah. And so do you tend to look more at analytics for exploratory purposes or diagnostics, or analytics for measuring impact? Because I suppose you could do both, couldn't you? Like, and that picture you were painting there of you got 50 different data sources all plugged into one place, that seems to me a little bit more kind of exploratory and diagnostic based. Like, let's just ingest it all, let's try and find the patterns, let's try and find the issues, then we can resolve something. Versus we've implemented something, let's measure the impact of it. Like, I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of a flavour for, based on the customers you work with, where is most of the activity that you find that you're working on?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the perspective is it depends on where you're starting, and we always see, the enterprise customers that have kind of grown to think about it as like enterprise journey management. They usually started with a specific problem, and then added data sources over time because the questions they want to ask changes, right? So maybe where you start is probably the most common thing is let's look at what web pages or mobile pages are most likely to drive a customer to make a phone call into the contact center or chat with the phone, because then you're looking at upstream to say, are there areas to optimize that experience in the web and mobile channel that are actually going to reduce those interactions to the contact center because the customer was probably trying to self-serve anyway. But then over time, so to start that, you're starting with, web and mobile data, maybe some contact center data. But then the next thing you might do is say, well, how was that experience on the web and mobile channel actually impacting CSAT? So let's pull in the voice of the customer data. So that now we can start to look backward, and then from a, to use your word, a diagnostic standpoint, if we think about bots, in the VUX context, I am a regular listener, by the way. If you think about, conversational AI and bots, like that's one step in the experience. So inside of those tools, you have, tuning and training tools. How do we actually make the bot? How do we optimize the bot? Did it do what it was supposed to do? But then taking a step back and seeing what impact to our business did that bot experience have? Like if we put a new intent in and we built out all the fulfillment capabilities for that bot, did it actually reduce cost to the contact center? Did it positively impact our customer, satisfaction, et cetera? So it's, you do have the diagnostic sort of in-channel focus from an analytics standpoint, but then you also want to take a step back and see, did it actually have the impact on our business that we expected it to have, right?
Absolutely, yeah. What are kind of some of the challenges that are the challenges the same today as you were alluding to earlier on in terms of kind of setting some of this stuff up? Because you mentioned there, for example, you might start with website data, and then you might try and put an intervention in on the website that then tries to, reduce contact in the contact center. But then you might pull in voice of the customer data. The challenge that I can sort of see there is these, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? These kind of like numbers that you see on the website data, because you might not necessarily be able to tie it to a specific individual. You've just got data, but then you've got voice of the customer data. And so it's tying that together, isn't it, to say, okay, this group of people on the website here had this impact on CSAT. And it's the challenge for me seems to be like tying it all together, and that, because you need to tie it to a customer level record in order to aggregate it, to understand it at a high level. So are those challenges still challenges that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that is kind of the, secret sauce. So whenever, I talked about how the problem statement is the same that we've been looking at for, nearly 2 decades, to date myself a little bit, is the same. But, the method that you're doing that connectivity across the channels has changed and gotten, a little bit easier. One of the kind of the proprietary things inside of the Pointless platform that was different, is really what we refer to as dynamic identity resolution. So you're essentially building a living profile of the customer. So any ID that we might collect from any channel, we're adding to that customer profile, so that when we go do analytics in real time, like whatever we know of the customer at this time, we can use that. Almost think about it as like, not to geek out and talk about, writing SQL queries, but, if you think about it as a join condition, right? Depending on the analytics that you're doing, you might want to look at it from a different lens. So if the customer has authenticated in the, in the mobile channel, in the IVR, et cetera, we're also probably going to be able to tie the account ID together with the voice of the customer data. And that's one lens, is to say, let's use the account ID as the join here. But we also might want to look at it a little differently. I could also maybe look at it by phone number, because that could be different people potentially. I could also look at it from the lens of, if I'm doing an analysis on, say, just the contact center, I might actually want the join condition to be the call, right, or the interaction. So let's look at these interactions, even though they crossed different channels. Let's see what was happening there. So it really is some flexibility where the analyst, depending on what question they're trying to ask, they might look at what's the efficiency of that new bot, like you said, or if we take a step back and I'm looking at it from a business lens perspective, I'm probably going to do a join on account ID. There's going to be scenarios where you don't have that, but I think about it in the analytics world, it's really an 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the customers, if we do have that information, are going to tell us the customer behavior information that we need to make positive changes from an optimization standpoint. And I think that's really what it's all about, right? Is to say, if you think about, in the contact center world, I think a lot of decisions have been made on inadequate data because, maybe we talked to the QA team, right? And they listened to a handful of calls and said, hey, I think we've got a problem. We listened to these 5 calls and this was happening. So you can take that hypothesis and then you can use journey analytics to say, how do we actually quantify that, right? Was it 100,000 customers that had a similar experience? And is it worth our time to go dig deeper and maybe make a change in one of those systems because we know the value's there, instead of sort of reacting to that anecdotal information that's not necessarily based in data, right?
Yeah. And that happens all the time in the contact center, doesn't it? Especially when you're talking to, agents and stuff like that. Everything's salient. Like whatever the salient issue of the week is, that's the thing that's the issue. Whereas over time, that's not necessarily the case. And I suppose that you could even have a less than 80-20 rule technically if you've got enough volume. As long as you've got enough volume of those people that you can tie together, then you can make informed assumptions about the trend that must exist across all customers. So even if you only had 30% of customers that you can tie everything together for, if those 30% of customers equals 1 million customers, and over the course of a month you've got 200,000 interactions, that's far more than enough that you need to actually make decisions on, isn't it?
Yeah, and to tie it back to, like I said, regular user, but whenever I reach a regular listener, when I reached out and thought this would be a good topic. I think, I'm looking back at my notes here. I think it was Yvonne, I think with Swisscom, mentioned that, I think the question that you had was, how do you know where to go build, new fulfillment capabilities for an intent? And I think the response was, we do struggle with having data to go make those decisions. And I like to take a step back and think about it from the customer journey standpoint, and not necessarily just look at, say, in the bot these are the intents that we're collecting, so we need to go do that. But it's also like, what was the customer maybe even trying to do upstream on the mobile channel, the web channel, to see what were they trying to do before maybe they called, because it's gonna skew things a bit, because maybe they're already frustrated and they're actually not even going to play with the bot, right? And then downstream, depending on what the intent is that we've detected in the conversational AI component, is that then what we've determined is the intent of the interaction with the agent in the speech and text analytics side, right? To say, we can kind of take a more data-driven approach to say, these are the top intents that people are calling about. Maybe we should build self-service capabilities out for those, but is that really what the interaction was about, right? So you can kind of look backward and say, are we collecting the intent in the right way? Do we have enough data, enough utterances to say that's what that intent was in the first place, right?
Definitely. You give me a bit of an idea there, which is like, to use that example of, is like, what was the user doing like upstream? So I suppose when people think about, and if to put it in the context of conversational AI, when people are creating a voice assistant or a chatbot or whatever, mostly on the voice channel, less so much on the chat, but it does happen, which is that ideally what you want to try and do is you want to try and authenticate the user, and then you want to try and see what you already know about them. I mean, we do this on the chat channel as well. So, before we have the conversation, let's just look at the phone number, let's look in the CRM, let's figure out what's going on. or let's first of all collect the reference number, validate your address, and see what we know about you already.
Sure.
And then you can start to sort of guide the conversation a little bit, and you can make it a bit more relevant. Like we've got a debt collection example, for example, where whatever they ask us, most of them end up in this authentication sort of process, which is where we need to go and find their record in the debt management system, figure out what the current state of their debt is, and then we'll answer the first question. But also, it might be something else that they're not aware of. So, what's the balance? What's the balance in my debt? Okay, well, we'll do that. We'll look up your debt, but actually your debt's been moved on to this bailiff, so you need to go and call them. So we're using the information we have to then make that conversation, one, more relevant, but then two, more personalized. But that's only based on very basic information. What you're alluding to there is that, let's say, for example, that upstream someone's had some difficulty on the website or in the app, and you know that because the average time spent in app is 2 minutes. This user spent 5 minutes, and 4 of those minutes have been spent all on the returns and refund pages. Then pulling that intelligence into the conversation is far better, because even though if you don't know anything about their previous orders or whatever, at least you're pulling intelligence from other sources. So I suppose that's all possible today. The question is whether that is this kind of stuff that you're seeing in production today, using all these different data sources to really understand the customer and then personalize journeys, because that would lead to really like personalization on a one-to-one level, really. Is that the kind of stuff you're seeing today, or do you think that we're sort of like a little bit kind of far away from that?
There's two pieces to it. I mean, the short answer is yes. And if you think about it, you're collecting all data into a platform to be able to do kind of some backward looking analysis you're looking in aggregate, all customers, to optimize what a potential opportunity or optimization opportunity is going to bring. And then you're utilizing, the orchestration platform, in this case, say it's Genesys Cloud, to go in and make those changes. And then on the other side of it with journey analytics, you're measuring the impact of that change. So that's kind of the way it's working today, is that, from an analytics standpoint, you're kind of looking historical data. But that's absolutely the vision, right? Is that we're able to take, segments of customers that are having certain experiences and then influence that customer experience in real time. So, I would say that's more, kind of vision that's on the horizon. But, there is a feedback loop there. And I'd also say there's an probably a really important organizational component to this too, is like, who owns the customer? I think one of the biggest challenges that, this space, let's say, has had in the last, couple decades has been, you have the folks that own the contact center, and they're focused on optimizing everything they can there, reducing costs, whatever. You have the folks that own the digital and digital channels, web and mobile channels, and they're typically interested in revenue growth, right? A lot of times that reports up through the marketing side. You have the customer experience folks, which used to really just kind of own CSAT and voice of the customer. And I do see that we're seeing a convergence there, where you have cross-functional teams that are interested in the overall customer journey experience and working together on those things, which is super important, right? So today, I would say it's kind of, you think about, you have an analytics team. They're going to be, we even see people kind of working in a, 2-week scrum or whatever. Hey, we're going to focus on this particular journey this week. What did we find? What can we optimize? And then they're in that feedback loop with whichever department that is that needs to potentially go make a change, whether it be the web and mobile team or the IVR team or the bot team or whatever, and have those cross-functional teams working together. I think that where you were headed probably was like, what are we seeing, like, really from a product and an implementation standpoint, is I'd say taking the journey insights and being able to react to those in real time is more kind of feature state, but we're able to absolutely take that historical data to inform what we're going to go change, and then test and learn and measure the impact of that change, right?
Definitely.
If that addressed your question, hopefully it wasn't
No, that's fine. So you were alluding to there the various different stages of where you might use analytics, and we kind of covered that from the top, like, the diagnostic kind of stuff where you're going to actually have an impact, and then the measurement of that impact and all that sort of stuff. At the beginning, in that exploratory phase, looking back at the historical data, trying to figure out where the issues are. What are your kind of recommendations around the best place to start? So would a client come to you and say, hey, the website example you used earlier, we've got a problem on our website that we really want to figure out? Or do they come to you and say, we think we can optimize our customer experience, we just don't know where? Are they particularly focused in an area that they want to try and investigate, or are they more broad level, like come in and do some analysis and show us what we should do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's always kind of best practices, and a lot of it, when I mentioned the organizational challenges, right, that we have, a lot of it's going to be driven by who we're working with and what access to data they have, right? So, if we're working with the contact center folks, usually if the first place that we would start is let's optimize the IVR or bot, right? There's always kind of low hanging fruit there, is that, you're looking at it from the perspective of, and this is omni-channel in nature and hard to do, is to say, because a lot of times the IVR measurement, the bot measurement is kind of isolated to, did it do what did it do what it was supposed to do? That isn't necessarily a measure of success. Did the customer actually accomplish what they wanted to accomplish? So you're taking the IVR data or the bot data and you're pairing it really together with the agent data and potentially like routing information in between. And, looking at what are the things, and this is kind of where that data-driven approach to say, customers that are attempting to do these things in the IVR are more likely to transfer through to an agent, whether it be, voice or chat. And then, from an analytics standpoint, you're looking back at that experience. So if you think about like traditional IVRs, you're almost thinking about it from like a dialogue module standpoint, like that, they pressed 1 and then they pressed 2 and whatever. So what's that sequence of events look like? And are there ways to optimize that, improve a prompt, reduce steps, all those things that are going to have a material impact, really from a cost reduction standpoint, as well as a CSAT improvement standpoint, is that the customer is going to be able to better self-service, which means there's going to be less calls to agents or less interactions to agents. So that would be, in the contact center, that'd be the first place to start. If we think about, again, maybe we have, good relationships across the enterprise, then I would say the first question customers have, because it's hard to do, is, hey, what are those web and mobile pages that are driving calls to the contact center or driving interactions to the contact center? And let's see if there's optimization. Because on the web and mobile side, right, you'll have the team adds a new capability in the mobile app or whatever, and they're excited about it. Adoption's great, right? People are, 60% of the time they're getting through this. Meanwhile, the contact center folks are going, hey, why do I have 10% more calls this week? And in a lot of cases, those organizations aren't communicating in that way. So, that's a low hanging fruit item. Then you also mentioned kind of the voice of the customer people. If we want to take a look back, I always look at the, maybe we get a low NPS score or low CSAT scores, and we can look back and see what was the experience prior to that low survey score. And, the fun thing with that one is that I think it's like 2 or 3% of people actually take the surveys they're offered. So you're able to say, okay, based on the people who gave us a low CSAT score, this was their behavior. But you're able to kind of quantify based on, hey, but we also had this many customers that had the exact same experience potentially. So you can quantify that to say, even though these pockets of people didn't give us, maybe they didn't take the survey, they probably had a poor experience, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. In the example there where you're beginning with the website and you're trying to, a new feature's released and calls go up in the contact center. What we used to spend a lot of time doing is, when I used to work in sort of government and that, because inevitably with government, there aren't as much opportunity for revenue generation as in a private enterprise. It's pretty, not necessarily regulated as such, but it's definitely, there's only certain things you can do essentially. So anytime anybody contacts you, it is 100% most of the time it's a cost. And so optimizing the website to make sure that it doesn't generate that traffic was a real sort of key area of focus for a long time. And what we used to end up doing is we would look at the contact center page, the contact us page, Then we would look back over the journey and say, what are the most common pages that lead to people going to the contact us page? And then that would be like where we would focus. We wouldn't necessarily tie activity on that contact us page to calls because it's a bit difficult to track. We could track things like if someone clicks on a phone number on their mobile, the little tell tag, you could sort of see how many people click on the numbers, but we weren't tying it together to the contact center. So in that example, is that the kind of stuff that you're doing, or do you have a way to sort of tie together traffic on the website to calls in the contact center?
Yeah, 100%. So is what I was saying before around the dynamic resolution. So,
Right.
again, probably 80-20 rule, but the way that works is, let's say that you go to a website today and you don't authenticate, we're at least going to have a cookie ID. And, most people don't clear their cookies. I don't know if you do
Mm.
often. Um,
Mm.
that same person comes back next week and they do authenticate. We now know that that cookie ID was the same person visiting last week. And now we have their account ID, which we can then, because if you're calling into the IVR, you're going to authenticate. We're already going to know your phone number when you call. And then, like you said earlier, we're going to do some kind of back end dip to the CRM or whatever to see who this person is. So all
Mm.
that information, regardless of where that data lives, like let's say it's in the CRM, we're able to collect that in the IVR system, and that becomes a part of that call record as well. So we're able to then tie those things together, that this was the same customer that was on online. And it's funny, you mentioned the contact us. So that's often like it's the next level down, right? Because it's like, well, yeah, of course, if they visit the contact us page, they probably called. But yeah, so it's the next level down. So let's throw contact us out and then look at what are the
Mm.
actual pages they were on before the contact us page, right? And then you're able to see what was there something the customer was trying to do that they were struggling with. And I'd also say, like, from a strategy standpoint, then I don't know that this is as much of a problem as it was, but we'd work with customers that we would suggest, like, maybe you should use web messenger on your website, and have like an FAQ bot with a chat, capability. And we would, there was almost a um, philosophical thing where you'd have customers go, well, I mean, I already have an FAQ on my website. Why do I want a bot to do it also? And the point is, well, your customer was already trying to get information and they didn't get it. So,
Mm.
now they're trying to reach out on the chat channel. Let's see if we can't take a shot at self-servicing them in a way that provides a good customer experience, because that's the channel they're in. So, don't look at it as a duplication of the same information. Look at it as a different way to present that information to a customer, right?
Yeah, or even a way of getting more granular information, because it may be that the thing that they need isn't in your FAQs and it should be, or maybe you've labeled your FAQs in a way that doesn't really make sense based on the kind of like mental model of the customer. If you call something one thing and that's the title of the FAQ, but the customer thinks it's called something else or whatever, there's all kinds of areas where having a conversational kind of AI assistant or bot will help you kind of uncover things that you don't really know.
Yeah,
So
huge. Like an
definitely.
example, like a huge cable provider that we worked with in the United States, as an example. This is one of the analytics that they did, or approaches that they did, is they were looking at exactly what we're talking about, like what are the things that are driving the calls, and they didn't have um, any like FAQ bot. Like, they definitely had FAQs on their website, which of course a lot of them were outdated, like low hanging fruit stuff. You'd find, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, 50% of the customers that visit this FAQ page call because the content's outdated and it's not answering their question. But then you also, they weren't doing anything to say, do you have a question with a say an FAQ bot, and then also leveraging additional, technology there to say, hey, do you want to get an SMS message with a link to the PDF or whatever, so that you can try to give them all the information that they need with a better experience, even though it might be some of the same information. And those things led to, I mean, off the top of my head, I think it was something like 30% reduction in those types of calls. They were like repair related. People are having issues with their set-top box or whatever, and they're going to the FAQ page, and then they end up calling. And it was really just like low-hanging fruit stuff, with the addition of maybe adding some additional technology approaches that had a significant impact on interactions that were then reaching an agent.
That makes sense. Yeah. You alluded to earlier on the one of the places where you might start might be in the IVR, and within that context, some of the things you might be looking at initially would be things like intent recognition, or the journey through the IVR, making sure that people are not just being contained, but they're getting the stuff that they actually need. Then you were alluding to bot optimization. Curious about how things are set up in Genesys, and how that customer journey stuff, the point list stuff, kind of coincides or mingles with the more sort of like detailed chatbot optimization stuff. Like, are they two entirely separate solutions? Is it part of one suite? And how much of either work do you spend your time doing? How much is it spent doing the kind of bigger picture stuff versus the specific kind of like detailed optimization?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So I'll take the consultant approach and say it depends, right? So yeah, as you can imagine, the acquisition is a little more than a year and a half old, right? So there's definitely some integration work that's still to be done there. So in our cloud platform, we have capabilities coming out here in Q4 that are really around, think about it as journey visualization inside of our flows. So flow being an IVR call, or a chat bot, or a voice bot, or a messaging bot, or whatever. And so, to give that, and really it's like to our earlier point, like what tools do you have to optimize the experience? It's visualizing what the customer's experience is going through those things. And that really would be leveraged by probably two primary people, right? It would be the person building the bot, or your conversational designer, those types of folks trying to understand where a customer's going, how are they using this thing. But then it also, if you think about the folks that are looking at the overall customer experience, they're trying to understand, what our customer's trying to do, and maybe what's next. And then, as we move like all those journey management, journey analytics capabilities into our cloud platform, you'll start to see, the kind of the robust kind of customer journey management. Like, let's manage things by customer journeys. So we do have, Pointlist, we do still have a separate platform today, depending on the use case. Of course, we had existing customers that were using that platform as well. So there's kind of two worlds that we live in right now, but the ultimate vision is that it's natively on top of Genesys Cloud, and then we have the ability to pull in those additional data sources from third parties, and that's always going to be a part of the DNA, right? Is we need to look at the entire customer journey. If they're using Adobe for web analytics, let's pull in the Adobe data. If they're using whatever Qualtrics or Medallia for voice of the customer, we'll leverage that data from a third party, right? So it's obviously we'll have the tight integration, natively inside of Genesys Cloud for sure. But then, we want to maintain that visibility into the entire customer journey, right?
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that you might want to measure for a specific use case might be different. For example, to use this debt collection client example, in that conversation, what we really care about is, like, one of the metrics is, did we successfully look up a customer record? Like, how many people have we actually authenticated and then give accurate answers to? And for those that are going through that authentication process and don't make it to the end, then why is that? Is it because we couldn't match their name in the system? Is it because their address has changed? So it's like, that's very specific to that conversation, as is the monetary value of debt that has been settled by the bot, for example. So all of that requires like customization based. This isn't something that I've seen a third party platform you could just pull out and it's displayed there. Like, we pull the amount of the debt from the debt record management system. We tie that back to a session and an activity that happened at the end of the session. Like, did someone set up an arrangement? Did someone make a payment? So the analytics basically reflect one is the specific things the business cares about. How much money is it settled? How many debts is it settled? And then some of the things that we care about, which is what's the performance of the conversation. And in order to get to both of those things, it requires customization. So how much of what you do, because it sounds as though Pointless does a lot of stuff, like you mentioned, being able to tie one customer record across multiple channels and stuff. It sounds as though some of this stuff is like more or less out of the box, providing you're using providers that you already kind of integrate with or whatever. So how much of what you do on a typical project is out of the box, give us your data, plug it in, ready to go, versus we need to do something very specifically custom because the information we're looking for is specific to this journey or this client?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd say it's kind of a 50-50, right? Because we're going to have things out of the box that customers are always interested in. If you're thinking about the contact center, it's going to be obviously, containment rate of, the bot, whether you're calling it self-service, effectiveness or containment or whatever. But then we want a sense of repeat interactions, right? The customer call back for the same thing over the course of a, 48-hour period of time or whatever you set that parameter as. We'll have, kind of a transfer to agent, KPI, like what, and then by intent, like what are the intents that actually end up with an agent? Like what's the rate of that? You'll have, agent to agent transfer type rates, like which a lot, makes you want to look back upstream, because if that first agent didn't resolve the interaction, then maybe we didn't route it properly or whatever. So those are kind of, out of the box things that you'd have. But then, you have the ability, if you think about building a journey, right? Journey is like a philosophical, dogmatic topic, right? Like, what is it? How do you define it? It really, at its core, right? I mean, a customer journey or any type of journey is really just a sequence of events that I want to analyze. So if the sequence of events that I want to look at is just, what's happening in that, particular channel, then I can build really any kind of KPI on top of that, and also have. So we look at things really simply, right? We look at it as an event occurred, and there might be multiple events in a channel. So, I mentioned earlier, like with an IVR, an event could be each dialogue module. Think about it that way. And at each event, there's additional kind of attribute data that could come along with it, right? So if we do that dip into the CRM system, and we know what products the customer has, or what type of customer, gold customer, et cetera, that attribute data comes along, so that whenever you're doing analytics on a specific journey and you're building additional kind of charts and KPIs against it, you can actually then segment by those things as well, right? So those are kind of the custom things that you get into, like where, for example, you mentioned in this debt collection case, do the customer, or probably would be more likely because you wouldn't get the payment yet, you could later, but maybe the agent or the customer gave you a promise to pay type. That could be like an indication in the collection world. So that could be a way that you slice your KPIs to say, what's my promise to pay rate for X? You could even look upstream to say, was there a campaign that was more effective than another? So if we're able to collect say it's the collection campaign as a variable that we can slice that data by from a segmentation standpoint, I can then even look at it from that perspective, like what campaign is more likely to result in the KPI or the promise to pay, say, than a different campaign. So you can kind of A/B test then your collections campaigns against each other, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, what we're actually doing there is we're actually looking downstream, which is this person promised to pay. 5 days later, is there a payment on that account? And then that's what then gets pulled back to say that conversation was successful. So there is a delay on a lot of the stuff because we need to, we've got jobs that run and look at systems to see whether things have been resolved and stuff. But even some of the stuff you mentioned there around some of the out of the box stuff, maybe it might be different based on whether the customer is a Genesys customer that uses the Genesys conversational AI platform, because even that containment is one thing. However, as you've mentioned, really what we care about is what happened. If it was contained as the customer had something resolved, and that may be that a question was answered, it may be that they've fulfilled something, like they've made a booking or they've made an appointment or whatever. And so even that, there's a difference between, I suppose, the end points within the conversation that would need to be, some event would need to be registered within the Genesys Analytics suite to say, when this event is triggered, that means this. Is that so? So when you say out of the box, I'm assuming there's some sort of config that must need to come alongside that for you to be able to define the things that you care about.
Yeah, that's right. So we're looking at things really from like the customer experience perspective. So what are the events that are occurring that are related to what that customer is experiencing? Meaning, so again, if we're thinking about a bot, it's like, each turn in the bot, what's the intent that's being collected. If there's additional information that is being pulled back from CRM, et cetera, we might pull that into segmentation type information. And there's definitely going to be some customization, customer to customer, depending on what the customer's doing. How did the customer build their flows out? That type of thing, right? But yeah, you're essentially looking at each. Think about it as each customer. Probably a turn in a bot is a good way to think about it, right? Because each turn in the bot is really another event, right? So you're, the same thing in an IVR, the dialogue module. If you think about a website, every web page I click on is an event, and there could be additional data that I collect about those events, about the customer, about whatever. So you're thinking about what are the steps, those are those events, and then what additional data is available to me from that system. And that allows me to have a lot of flexibility in terms of what I want to measure, what I want to analyze.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then how much of is in terms of the work that you do and the customers that Genesys have, all of this stuff, because it can be quite detailed, certain companies care about certain things, and therefore maybe it's a simple thing of using some of the out-of-the-box features. Maybe there's some work to be done to get access to certain data or whatever it might be. Like, how much of this stuff do your customers do on their own? They just log into the Genesys platform and they crack on, versus how much of this do you or your team or people at Genesys need to get involved with to sort of help them get set up and stuff like that? I'm assuming it's probably horses for courses and it differs. I'm just wondering if you can shed some light on whether most organizations are quite self-sufficient and capable, or whether there's a sort of gap in skills here that people might want to be aware of.
Yeah, so you can break, if we're talking specifically about customer journey analytics, you can break it up into two pieces. You have the data side, right? And then you have the analytics side. So I would say on the data side, and it depends also if you've got, an enterprise customer is going to have data teams and data lakes and whatever, so they're going to be pretty well versed at getting us what we need, right? They might have already pulled everything into a data warehouse, and maybe it's, data from all these different channels might even be in that single warehouse. And so in that case, from the data side, it's a bit of a joint effort in terms of us communicating what we need to pull in, them communicating what's available. You probably need, a subject matter expert that understands the data, but then you also need somebody that understands the business, because in a lot of cases, right, they'll have some kind of business specific code that it doesn't make any human readable sense, right? What's X25 mean, right? So you need to kind of apply that business vernacular so that then the people that are doing the analytics understand what X25 actually means. So on the analytics side, I would say that it's probably more, 75-25, that the customers are doing probably more of the analytics piece, and, they're building dashboards, doing journey analytics, et cetera. And then, we of course do have, services resources that if a customer doesn't want to do that work, we can do that. We have partners that have some of that skill set as well. And, we have, actually, I think some of our partners are really excited about, if they have a CX management practice of utilizing, journey analytics as an ongoing services offering that they have, right? Like, how are we going to, every quarter we're going to come back with recommendations, and then they have also the resources that are then going to go make those changes in the IVR or on the website or whatever. So they see it as a way to just continually, deliver services and then deliver changes as well. So it's, it's a mix of the type of customer, the resources that they have, how they're organized. Back to that, earlier point, is that if we are just talking to the contact center and they have a small analytics team only focused on the contact center, that's the only thing they're focused on, right? Whereas if we are, working with an enterprise that is maybe even has a customer journey focused team, they're probably kind of acting as a center of excellence for the rest of those organizations, right?
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So we can't really end without talking about generative AI and large language models, can we? So what impact? There's a few things we could answer here. I suppose maybe we should start with, what impact has generative AI and large language models already had, if any, on the work that you're doing?
So I would say that the impact it's had already is kind of back to us being able to kind of measure did the did the change or the thing that we implemented, with that's using generative AI have the business impact that we wanted. So, for example, we recently released some capabilities that are around auto summarization of kind of after call work for agents, right, using generative. So you're able to then track, did that have the positive impact on the handle time that we expect? Also, did it then have the impact on the, maybe on the customer experience because, the agent's actually getting that information real time. So from the analytics standpoint, it's really more um, the downstream of did that generative AI capability have the impact that we wanted to. As we think about it in the future, and that's obviously an area that Genesys is really investing in, where near and dear to your heart would be auto generate. We have all these transcripts, right? Auto generating training data for bots, and then eventually it's like automatically creating bots, all that kind of stuff. And then I think from a customer journey standpoint, you take the same approach, right? Is to say, here's all the pathways, right? All the connected customer journeys, and how do we automatically generate like what these are the journeys that customers are taking. These are the journeys that you should be interested in, and kind of using generative to sift through the data and kind of remove some of that data discovery work that today is somewhat manual, right? So it's definitely something that we're thinking about and investing in. And but I think like in the immediate term, it's more about what was the impact of that thing that's using generative AI on the agent, on the customer, et cetera, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and so for that, you would then presumably be looking at more because the challenge with generative AI and large language models in general is quantifying some of the stuff that it can output. So I suppose in your case with the summarization, the thing that you're looking for isn't necessarily like the output of the generative model. You're looking at really the outcome of the implementation, as in, has this saved X time in agents wrapping up calls, stuff like that? Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. So the way that works is you have, in real time, the customer and the agent's, call transcript is being summarized, right? So as the agent's wrapping up that interaction, you're basically presenting back a note, to say, was this the summary of your call? So the agent, is kind of the supervisor there to say, it is, enter, or I need to make some modifications to that. And then we have a capability that's coming here really soon too, which is also, if you think, it's not necessarily using this part is using generative, but we're using AI to surface articles to the agent in real time, like based on the context of that conversation. So then you're using generative to highlight relative passages in the article. So if the customer and the agent are talking about, how do I pay or where do I pay my bill, and you've got an article that's a paragraph long, the agent will be presented with that information, but actually have the specific information highlighted in the blob of text that they receive back. So then from the analytics side of it, it's, like you said, it's how do we measure the impact of that, both to the agent as well as to the customer, right? So did did we impact first contact resolution because that agent had the information at their fingertips to address their question, kind of looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose there's things you can do which some chatbots do, but it's very hit and miss depending on how much traffic goes through it and stuff like that. But it's stuff like looking at the number of times that an agent edits a response. Like, if the agent edits every single response, maybe there's some tuning that needs to be done to make the transcripts, the summaries a bit better, or even maybe asking them things like, how helpful was this helpful? Yes, no, kind of, that kind of stuff, which again, you're never going to get everyone to do. And even those that do it probably will skip doing it if they realize there's a shortcut to doing it. But it's a case of like, it's that question again, isn't it? Of like getting enough data to then kind of like assume a trend on it to then point you in the right direction, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it for sure. And it's all, it's all things that I always, the cliche I say, right, is like AI for me is like it's like a better shovel, right? Like we're solving the same we're digging the same hole that we were always digging.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes to, reducing handle time, reducing cost, reducing calls, whatever. I mean, we're still doing all those things, but like there's so much opportunity with generative AI to make all those things better. So, if we even take like the example we were just talking about of kind of summarizing to the next level is like, we still have customers that have like a drop down list of 150 reason codes for an agent to pick from. What was the call about? And so yeah, you have speech and text analytics today that can do that, but let's just use AI. Like remove that, take that out of the agent's hands because it's not really accurate anyway, and just just do that automatically for them, right? So there's so much opportunity to just take, from a efficiency standpoint, but also an employee satisfaction standpoint, right? So much. I saw a stat that I think it was 60% of an agent's time is spent searching for data, noting things, toggling back and forth between systems or whatever. So I just think about how much. So my first job, by the way, was I was an agent in a contact center. Dating myself, that was like 30 years ago or something, like 20, something like that. But I just think about that as like, how much easier would it make your life if you could just actually spend time focusing on the customer, showing empathy to them, and then moving on to the next one, right? Because and having all the other pieces kind of done automatically for you. So I think there's just so much opportunity there.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Final thoughts. Is there one metric, one thing that trumps everything else when it comes to measuring the impact of your customer experience? If someone's listening thinking, okay, we could measure this, we could measure that, there's like, if there was to be a North Star, is there a North Star? And if there was, what would that North Star be?
That's a tough one. It depends on who you're asking, right? So I mentioned earlier the organizational side. If we're talking to kind of sales and marketing, it's going to be revenue growth, right? If you're talking to the contact center, maybe it's going to be in cost reduction. So maybe I'll answer it a little differently, is to say, if you're looking at the entire customer journey, you can start to actually track KPIs that you couldn't before. So if I want to look at, what's my customer's effort, or a common KPI that we see customers implement is, how we call, I've heard it called a number of things, but like channel hops, right? So if I have a customer trying to do something, like how many channels did it take them to complete that thing? So those are somewhat tactical, but they're insightful into the problem you're trying to solve, which is, I want to improve customer experience, I want to reduce churn, I want to reduce cost, I want to grow revenue, right? Those are kind of the high level metrics that obviously everybody's driving toward. But taking the approach to look at the customer journey across all these different channels, et cetera, allows you to create kind of net new journey specific KPIs that are otherwise really hard to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the whole thing about finding data and insights that you couldn't do otherwise is a really important point, especially when it comes to conversational AI. Because you mentioned there that if you've got some customers that have 100 wrap codes, guaranteed some people in that contact center have got habits whereby they will just pick whichever ones they're comfortable with, and it's probably going to be something in that top 10 even if the actual call wasn't. And so you'll have companies out there who believe they understand what customers are calling about, but in reality they're probably miles away. And the thing with conversational AI is that there is absolutely no escaping the actual ground truth, because people are actually telling you in their own words specifically what they're trying to do. Unlike the web, where you could look at the Contact Us page and the previous pages that we visited, and you could make massive assumptions about why the customer needs to contact. You know what they were doing, but you don't know why they were trying to do it, and you don't know why they contacted you. All of that qualitative stuff is totally missing. Whereas with conversational AI, you get the qualitative stuff, and you can analyze that at scale, that not only will give you a better picture of the current situation, better than rap codes will, but definitely will give you new insights into areas of the business that you probably don't realize need attention right now. So, yeah, I concur with all of the above.
That's right.
Cool. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolute pleasure. Really, really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And
pleasure.
likewise, I'm assuming everybody knows Genesys, but if you don't and you want to learn more, then you can go to genesys.com. and I'm sure that Tim wouldn't mind connecting with you on LinkedIn. Also, if you are interested in the stuff that we've been talking about, you want to get a bit of a deeper handle on this kind of stuff, then yeah, if you're all right with that, Tim, I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I could talk about this stuff all day, so no problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Coming next, what's coming next? Let me just have a quick look and see what's next on the VUX World podcast. Next up on the VUX World podcast is going to be Sentio CX next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Sentio CX has an interesting capability. I don't know if you come across it or not, Tim, but essentially what it does is it's almost like skill-based routing or routing, depending on where in the world you come from. But it uses the information and context gathered within a conversational AI assistant to then prioritize and manage all of the routing. So rather than hard coding everything in your system, in your solution, this basically is almost like a bit of middleware that manages all of your routing for you. And so we're going to be getting into a bit of detail about what that is, how it works, what the value is, and all that kind of stuff. So if you are around, then yeah, that's next Thursday at 5 p.m. GMT.
Awesome.
And
Thanks so much.
That. Nice one. Thank you all very much. We'll see you again